Hey guys, this is Rajat from e-GMAT. So in this video, I'm going to talk about this inference question that we posted on our YouTube channel. Simple inference question is the question that I created just to really see whether we can draw some basic inferences. If you have not solved this question, pause the video at this particular time and have a go at this question. So here are the stats for this question. I mean, as I said earlier, it's a fairly simple question. 72% of you chose choice B, which is the correct answer. Choices A and E were other choices that people chose. And we have 65 votes. I mean, this data, it's 65 responses. You are within that 10% confidence interval. So it's not great. Typically we go for about 2% confidence interval, but we go for 98%. This is in the 90th% confidence interval overall. So it's quite reasonable. And I think given that the other choices are just very few and choice B is overwhelmingly there, I would say I would classify this as an easy question. So let's now see the solution. All right, guys. So let's kind of analyze this particular simple argument. So what this argument's saying, or rather this passage is saying, it's not an argument since there is no conclusion, is that 20% of the buildings in the city of Dakshan were destroyed in the 75 earthquake. Let's go back to the black one. So essentially, if there were 1,000 buildings over there, and when we get stuff such as 20%, I always like to take some numbers. So what the author is saying is there were 1,000 buildings in the city of Dakshan, but 200 were destroyed. Now, there's something peculiar about it, which is this: at the same time, only, and only is a very important keyword, which means that, hey, only this group and no other group, only building taller than 3 stories were destroyed. So essentially, what we can say is that each of these 200 buildings were 4 stories or tall. So 4 or 4 plus, essentially. So this includes 4 or 4 plus. So they're either 4 stories tall or 5 stories or 6 stories or 7 stories. So why do you say that? Because it says taller than 3 stories tall. So let's kind of do some pre-thinking. Before we go and look at the answer choices, it's always pertinent to do some pre-thinking over here. And let me just bring the pre-thinking notion and say, what can we pre-think with this information? So one of the first things that we can pre-think is, if there is a building that were destroyed, it probably was taller than 3 stories. Why? Because that's something that was there. So that's one inference that we can draw. That's number one. And then the other thing that you can really say is, hey, we know that only 20% of the buildings were destroyed and not 100%. So which means there probably were a few buildings that survived the earthquake. That's also another inference that we can draw. Now, the goal of pre-thinking is not to think of all the possible inferences that you can draw, but only think about a certain set of possible inferences so that you kind of get an idea of the information that's presented to you. Now, once you've done that, let's kind of go into the answer choices over here, and I'm going to just zoom it in a bit. Choices says in Dakshan, most buildings taller than 3 stories were destroyed. So the word most means 50% or higher. And do we know that 50% of the buildings taller than 3 stories were destroyed? No, we don't know that. What we only know is that only 20% of the buildings were destroyed. Now, that 20% could comprise of 60% of buildings taller than 3 stories, or those 20% could comprise of 30% of the buildings taller than 3 stories. We don't know either way, and hence choice A is wrong. And I'm going to go towards choice E, which was again a popular choice. Choice E says the foundation it compares the foundation in smaller buildings versus that in taller buildings. So essentially it says in smaller buildings is stronger than that in taller buildings. Again, do we know anything about the foundation based on the information in the passage, or we don't know anything about it? Similarly, choice C talks about how stringent those building codes were. Again, we don't know anything about the building codes. We can't infer anything about it. And hence, since we can't do that, that is wrong as well. Okay, and choice D is wrong along the same lines. You can't compare. You can't really say whether a building that's 6 stories tall is more likely to be destroyed than something that's 5 stories tall. Okay, choice B, which is our correct answer, really says in the action during this earthquake. So we're talking about this very specific event. The information over here is about this very specific event over here. The likelihood is the probability that a building taller than 3 stories were destroyed was higher than that of a building 2 stories tall. So what do we already know from the question is that pretty much all the buildings that are destroyed are taller than 3 stories. So 3+ stories. So everything that's destroyed is 3+ stories, and what we know is that anything that's 2 stories was not destroyed. So clearly this part can be inferred, which is that, hey, the likelihood that a building that is taller than 3 stories that was destroyed was higher than that of a building which is taller than 2 stories, which is 2 stories tall. So it's a specific height, 2 stories tall. Why? Because we know that's a building that's 2 stories tall. The likelihood of that being destroyed is 0, and whereas a building that's 3 stories higher than 3 stories, the likelihood of that being destroyed is greater than 0. Okay, that likelihood is greater than 0 over here. So which is why this choice is correct. So again, very basic question. If you faltered on this, look at why you faltered on this, and essentially as you do that deep dive analysis, you're going to find out that you were either thinking outside the scope of the information provided in this passage, or you misread a word. Either way, take the learnings with you. We will continue to post more questions, so keep on checking the channel, and if you haven't, do subscribe to the channel.